The name of this presentation is Everyday Diversity. And the reason why I named it that it was because diversity is an everyday decision. Sometimes people like to put diversity in a box and we only think about it when we're hiring someone or when there's a promotional decision to be made. But diversity is an everyday decision. There is no human resource decision that impacts an individual or a group of individuals that does not also have an impact on diversity. You have to remember every individual comes with a race, a gender, a national origin. Therefore, every decision has an impact on the diversity of your organization. Even if, for example, you're in an organization that has only people of one gender, one race, if you make the decision as simple as to send someone to training, you are impacting diversity because by sending that person to training, you are saying that you are now investing in individuals so that you can obtain the KSAOs that you need internal to the organization rather than seeking to employ people external to the organization and getting your KSAOs there. When you seek to employ people external to the organization, you would at least have an opportunity to expand your diversity. Therefore, a decision to just send the same a group one person from the same gender, socioeconomic, race, ethnic group to training still has an impact upon diversity because it takes away because of the opportunity cost that you learn about in economic consequences. The opportunity cost is the lack of another opportunity to get diversity in your organization. So, we talk today about everyday diversity because every human resource decision generally will have an impact on human beings or a group of human beings, and therefore it will have an impact upon the diversity of your organization. When we talk about diversity, in terms of the HR goals, in terms of the analytical framework to view all human resource decisions and policies that we discussed in previous modules. What equal employment opportunities, what diversity seeks to do is attract, retain, and develop a workforce that is competent, productive, and diverse. Essentially, what they're trying to do is bring to and keep within an organization a diverse group of people that are also able to do the job. Um, that's that those goals are certainly not mutually exclusive. In fact, Motorola did a study years ago and clearly found that diverse groups handle complex issues in a much more efficient and effective manner. And the reason for that is when you have a complex issue that has many aspects, you need on that team uh, people who look at things in various ways, who will see it through various filters of their life and be able to attack it in various ways. And therefore, complex issues are much more thoroughly dealt with by people who are coming from various perspectives. Now, it does mean that those groups sometimes have a harder time gelling and pulling together because they are coming from various perspectives. But once they gel, there is a much better and more efficient work product that comes about as a result of that. The other portion, goal that EEO, Equal Employment Opportunities and Diversity, seeks to have in an organization is to create an environment that treats employees, applicants, and former employees in an ethical and equitable manner. And that truly is one of the major goals of any EEO, equal employment opportunities, or any diversity thrust, trying to create an environment that treats people in a fair manner, in a lawful manner, in essence, compliance. The two prongs of any diversity program are indicated in these two goals here. One, a diversity program is designed to try to attract and bring to an organization diverse people with diverse backgrounds to handle the operations of that organization. That's true in any sector, public, private, nonprofit. The other prong is that diversity is to comply with the law, to avoid the lawsuits, to avoid the bad publicity. And so as a result, compliance is a major portion. This lecture is going to dance in and out of a discussion about diversity as an initiative to attract and retain a diverse workforce, but it's going to spend a large portion about compliance, how you stay within the law. Now we're going to get into the substance of this lecture. Recognize that discrimination, the term discrimination, means the power to make distinctions between things, between employees, between employment situations. That's what managers are hired to do. Every manager discriminates. They make decisions based upon valid facts, making decisions that impact people based upon those valid facts. That's what you get paid the big bucks to do. Those distinctions, however, you make those distinctions based upon valid facts, not impermissible facts. Now, all distinctions, all discrimination is not unlawful. And therefore, what managers are called upon to do is make distinctions based upon valid facts, not unlawful facts. It becomes unlawful discrimination when you make distinctions based upon impermissible reasons. Now, impermissible reasons is defined by the law. While there may be some ethical considerations that we all have with regards to impermissible reasons, what makes something unlawful is that it is a violation of some law. And if there is no law that makes it unlawful, though it may be indeed unethical, it is not unlawful. You're going to understand why I make that distinction when we start talking about impermissible reasons, which is right now. Impermissible reasons are those reasons that you see on the side of this slide. You cannot make a decision, a distinction based upon race. I am going to hire this person because they are Latino. No, you cannot do that. You can't hire them because they are qualified. That's fine. And the fact that they are Latino, that may help. But you make the decision based upon a permissible reason. They're qualified. They have the KSAOs. You cannot make a decision based upon ethnicity. Ethnicity meaning not necessarily race, but other ethnic classifications that are there. Ethnicity and race do sometimes go hand in hand, but ethnicity does not necessarily go hand in hand. Give you an example. You can have a person who is black, but one's an African American and one is a person of African descent who is from South America, or a person of African descent who is from Africa. They're different ethnicities. And therefore, if a person from South America who is black is now suing another person from South America who happens to be black, but they're of different ethnic groups, then or an African is suing another African, but they're of different ethnic groups. One is an Ashanti, and one is a Dagomba, both from Ghana, but both from different ethnic groups. And there was some evidence that I'm partial to Ashantis because they look like me, because they have some characteristics that I like. Then yes, you can argue ethnicity it was an impermissible reason. You cannot make a decision based upon ethnicity. You cannot make a decision based upon religion or a sect, or even the lack of a religion. So you cannot say because you're an atheist, I'm making this decision, and you're not protected because atheism isn't a religion. If it's a belief structure, it's either a sect or a religion or a creed, maybe a better way of saying it. Cannot discriminate based upon color. Now, this area has seldom been litigated, because it really doesn't get litigated, because if a person's black and a person's white, they just say you did it because of race. This comes up when you have two black people and they're saying, oh, you preferred the fair-skinned, the lighter-skinned black person over the darker-skinned black person. And courts have just basically said we're not going to get into that kind of distinction, because at that point, we may be talking about shades of blackness, and courts are just not comfortable in that area. But you can do it based upon color. That is still an impermissible reason to make a distinction, and therefore you can file a lawsuit based upon color. It's an impermissible reason to base a decision on national origin, where a person is from, the country of their origin, or the country that their family descended from. That's impermissible. But again, that may fall back to ethnicity. For example, you have a U.S. citizen born in the U.S., but he was born of parents from the Middle East. Therefore, you clearly look at the person, know that they are of Middle Eastern descent, and when they file the lawsuit saying national origin, they're saying, well, you were born in Cleveland. You can't file a lawsuit based on national origin, because everybody who made the decision about you were Americans also, and therefore, how can you say that we were prejudiced against you because you were an American? And that weakens the case. But the person can then go back and say, no, it's because of my ethnicity. Because I am of Middle Eastern descent, that's my ethnic group, and therefore I'm protected because you made the distinction based upon ethnicity. So recognize that people are going to use, as they are trying to make a determination about why a decision was made not in their favor, they're going to go down this list and find out which one do I best fit in and builds the best case for me. Can't make a distinction based upon age if the distinction is saying you're too old, you're over 40 out there. Age discrimination is probably actually now considered to be the most frequent complaint is age discrimination, because it covers people of all races, all genders, and it basically covers baby boomers who are still young, healthy, and not wanting to retire and being the subject of discrimination. You cannot make a distinction based upon sex. If a policy has an impact upon one gender or another, then sex it's going to it's going to create a problem. Sexual orientation. In some states, you cannot make a decision based upon sexual orientation. You notice I said in some states, because we'll find that there is no federal law that protects sexual orientation discrimination. So you could theoretically, under federal law, in some states, make a distinction based upon sexual orientation. But whether that is ethical is another debate for another issue, another day. Is it lawful? From a federal standpoint, is lawful. There's nothing that protects a person because of sexual orientation in federal law. There is nothing in North Carolina law that protects a person because of sexual orientation from a law standpoint. There are policies that do that for various employers, the University of North Carolina being one. But there's no statewide law that protects an employee in a private sector entity or public sector entity or nonprofit. Disability status. Cannot make a distinction based upon disability status. There is a federal law, covers the land, cannot make that distinction. Veteran status. Cannot make a decision, cannot make a distinction, cannot discriminate based upon veteran status. There is, in fact, a federal law that protects that. And genetic information, cannot make a decision or distinction based upon genetic information. That is probably the most recent addition to the civil rights panoply that the Congress has passed. One other thing students should note is I noted that if merely because something seems unfair doesn't mean that it is unlawful. For example, this list does not include discrimination because of size, because a person is obese or short. There is no protection for a person merely because of their size or obesity, unless you can show that that size or that obesity is a handicap within the definition of the ADA. And I'm not sure that and I'm pretty sure that issue's been litigated and it has not been proven to be a handicap. And therefore, while it may seem to be unfair to discriminate against a person because of the size or because of their stature, it is not unlawful. Again, if there is not a specific statute, either in federal law or in state law or in local ordinance, which prohibits distinctions made upon that characteristic, it is not unlawful unless it could be said to be totally arbitrary and capricious. If, for example, you say, I can't be a teacher because I am too short, that's probably arbitrary and capricious. You can't show a reasonable relationship between my height and being able to teach. However, you could probably say, I can't be a policeman because I am too short. Because I think you can show a reasonable relationship between the stature of a person and the ability to intimidate enough people so that you have a major presence, physical presence, in tense situations, which policemen have to do all the time. That's not arbitrary and capricious. Therefore, because it's not arbitrary and capricious, that would be lawful discrimination, even though you may think it to be unethical and unfair. It's lawful because there's no federal statute, there's no state statute, no local ordinance, and it is not arbitrary and capricious. Now, I need to go back and reiterate. Every human resource decision that has an impact upon a person or group of people also has a equal employment opportunities or a diversity impact. So, the question always is, did you do it? Was the decision made based upon an impermissible reason? When your human resource systems are designed to attract, that is, hire people, to retain them, keep them in the organization, develop those who are within the organization so that they become competent and productive, a human resource system tries to treat people in an ethical and in an equitable manner, tries to treat them fairly, and tries to treat them in a way that they feel good about the organization and motivated about the organization. And sometimes human resource systems always have to deal with the allocation of resources. The way the people are being paid is an allocation of resources. The compensation system is an allocation of resources. How you reduce people in force or furlough people, as a topic that's been discussed in the news much lately. All of those are human resource systems, and those decisions have impact on diversity. If you make those decisions in an impermissible manner for one of the reasons that we have on the side of the page, then it's possible that there is a violation of the law, either federal, state, or local law. And in that case, you can find yourself out of compliance with the law. Now let's talk about equal opportunity in terms of trying to attract people to the organization. You'll come to understand that most of these civil rights statutes are in fact enforced or regulated by the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. The EEOC has promulgated some uniform guidelines for employment, for hiring. And those uniform guidelines give employers, both public sector, private sector, and nonprofit, guidance as to how to engage in various recruitment activities, attraction activities, in compliance with the EEO law. As you would guess, because of the multiplicity and the variety of employers out there, employers are constantly looking for guidance as to how they can select the people who have the essential KSAOs and do it in a manner in which they still have and still are able to attract and retain a competent and diverse workforce. And so they do that. One of the first things that occurs anytime you're trying to attract is you need to recruit. And those guidelines are several pages, and we will not go over them in this PowerPoint. But there's several pages, and but amongst them, you will find some specific guidance with regards to recruiting. One of the things that you do anytime you recruit is you essentially announce the opening. It is quite obviously fundamentally unfair to have an opening, select someone for that opening without announcing it, giving other people opportunities to compete for the position. Now, I know you're sitting there saying this happens all the time. In fact, probably 50% of you got your current employment as a result of knowing someone. Well, there's nothing unlawful about the hookup. There's nothing unlawful about knowing someone at a place and getting a leg up on that knowledge. It becomes unlawful outside of compliance with guidance when they don't advertise, and when it's not advertised, and when other people don't have an adequate and fair chance to compete. If you were given some preference because you know someone, that preference is not unlawful assuming that knowing someone isn't another way of saying I got it because I'm black and someone else was black and they recommended me, and only black people get hired, or only white people get hired, or only Asians get hired, or only women get hired, then that, yes, can be unlawful. That kind of hookup is unlawful. But if it is, most people receive their jobs based upon networking, that's not unlawful. However, the job does need to be announced, and you need to announce the essential KSAOs. When we say essential KSAOs, meaning you need to have engaged in a job analysis, broken down that job, and found out what that job requires. And the job analysis will do that. We'll tell you what the job requires, and then based upon that job analysis, you're able to break the job down into KSAOs, and then you're able to advertise for those KSAOs. The KSAOs, however, must be job related. Must be job related. You had in your reading a case called Griggs v. Duke Power. In Griggs v. Duke Power, a case litigated by your former Chancellor, Chancellor Chambers, who went to the Supreme Court, you had a case in which Griggs, representing the people at Duke Power who were in the more menial tasks, basically sought to be promoted. Duke Power had a policy that you had to have high school education in order to be in virtually any position. But when you looked at that, what that meant was that it disproportionately hindered minorities who at that point did not have high school educations. It disproportionately hindered minorities from being considered. And so that mere requirement disproportionately made their pool of qualified applicants much wider, much less minority. Well, the case in Griggs, essentially they're saying the position that he was applying for, high school diploma did not relate to it. You had a number of people who had performed that job adequately without having gone to high school, could perform the job without having gone to high school, and Duke Power could not show a relationship between that knowledge, that KSAO, that knowledge that they are requiring, high school education, and the job. And because there was no link, then the court then said, and if that link therefore hinders or disproportionately impacts one of the suspect groups, blacks, women, people from different ethnicities, in this case blacks, then in that case it is considered to be discriminatory. Now, what if Duke Power had a requirement that you had to, for a janitor's job, you had to be able to lift 50 pounds? Well, in that case, if you had to lift 50 pounds and essentially that was going to eliminate a number of women, if Duke Power could show that the job required you in the job to be able to lift 50 pounds because you were lifting sacks of cleaner and other things, then you'd be able to say the job actually requires it. While yes, this requirement has a disproportionate impact upon women, meaning there are fewer women in your pool as a result of this requirement, Duke would still be lawful, because if it is job related, you can have the requirement. What Griggs v. Duke said, you cannot put a requirement that is not job related. Therefore, in the example I tend to use is, do I need to be ambulatory? Can I be on a wheelchair and teach graduate school? The answer is yes. I can be in a wheelchair and teach graduate school. On the other hand, can I be in a wheelchair and teach kindergarten? that may be a tougher call, because in kindergarten, teacher needs to get down on the floor, needs to be able to run after kindergartners who don't tend to have the same level of discipline as a graduate student. In those instances, that requirement to be ambulatory is reasonably job related for the kindergarten teacher. It's not, at least it can be argued for the kindergarten teacher. It cannot be even argued and pass the laugh test for a graduate professor. And so as a result, even though you have two people who are teachers, the Griggs v. Duke would work differently in those instances. But again, Griggs v. Duke is sort of a two-prong. And before it starts reacting, you must be able to show that the requirement is not job related, and it must show that there is a disproportionate impact upon some protected or suspect category, in some suspect category. If you can show that it is job related, then the practice is lawful. If it has no disproportionate impact upon any minority group or any suspect category, the practice is lawful. So again, you have to be able to show both of them for Griggs v. Duke to kick in. If both of them are not there, then Griggs v. Duke does not. If both of them are not there, then Griggs v. Duke does not kick in. And just by the way, when I use the term kick in, I mean it doesn't apply. So in an instance in which I am requiring you to be 5'8" tall to be a police officer, and women say that disproportionately impacts women in the pool, since the average woman is not 5'8", then the police force would have to be able to show that 5'8" is a reasonably relates to your ability to be a commanding presence in a high intense situation that police officers have to operate in. And if they can show that that is the case, then the practice is going to be lawful. Or if they can show that it does not have a disproportionate impact upon women, that their average woman in their community is 5'8" or more, then they're going to be able to do it. But on the other hand, if you're able to show the average woman is not 5'8" in your community, then you've got to then go look, is this reasonably related to the job? If you can still show that it's reasonably related to the job, it's a lawful practice. If you cannot show that it's reasonably related to the job, then it is not a lawful practice and cannot be sustained or maintained. Announcements should further indicate the lawful preferences. Now, there are a number of lawful preferences. One, obviously, the one that comes to mind quickly is affirmative action. Recognize that affirmative action is indeed a preference. It is a way of saying, given between two candidates, I'm going to prefer a candidate because of their race or their gender over some other candidate of a different race or gender. In essence, affirmative action is court-recognized discrimination, because obviously you are taking one of the impermissible reasons for making a distinction and using it to make a distinction. So it is an extraordinary remedy that only can be lawfully administered when there's been some demonstration of historic discrimination. So when I go to the fire department and I see that they've not hired any minorities in the last 15 years, that minorities are not going to be able to obviously make it into the upper levels because they've just not been hired, with the exception of the few that may have been hired before the 15-year gap, then you could, an employer who does the right kind of disparity study would then be able to say, yes, we have a track record, we have a history, and in order to remedy that situation, we will give preference to minorities or of some sort. So in essence, you make the distinction based upon one of the impermissible reasons. But again, it is in a rare instance where you're able to show this as a need in order to rectify a past issue. But there are other lawful preferences also. There's veterans preference. Quite frequently, employers, federal government employers, will give preference to people who are veterans. State government employers will give preference to veterans. Veterans nonprofit groups give preferences to veterans. And in some instances, even military contractors in the private sector and others give preferences to veterans. And you need to announce that preference will be given to those who are veterans there. Or spouses of military sometimes get preferences. What a preference basically says is, I'm going to, all things being equal, this person is going to get selected. And in some instances, it says, even if all things aren't equal, if they are relatively equal, I'm going to give preference to this other person because they are a veteran, or because they are a spouse of a military person, or because they're an internal employee. Some employers are always going to give right of first refusal, either because of union contract or because of employment practices, to their internal candidate. That's their way of building morale and saying we grow our own from within. You never get to be a superintendent of a prison in most states without having worked your way through the ranks. They're going to make sure that they hire internal. That's for a number of reasons, just because of the experience and the practices of each prison unit or each prison system is quite different, but they tend to hire from within as also a motivational instance. Some employers give preference to members, nonprofits particular. Churches are going to certainly give a preference to a member to be their chief musician. AARP is going to give preference to a member to be a lobbyist for AARP. And so preferences will be given, and they are lawful preferences. These preferences, a preference is going to be lawful so long as that preference does not hinge upon an impermissible distinction, race, gender, national origin, ethnicity, religion, and a preference is going to be all right even so long as it does not have a disproportionate impact upon some minority or suspect group. I will tell you that veterans' preference at one point had a disproportionate impact upon women because most veterans are men. As a result, when an agency says, I'm going to give veterans preference then worked to make sure that men were given extra points, extra consideration, and it knocked women out of the pool. In that particular instance, that's a lawfully created preference that knocked women out of the pool, and as a result, it stood the test of discrimination out there. Now, if you are now giving preference based upon some policy that does that, you fall back into Griggs v. Duke. Is it essential for the job? And if it is essential for the job, it doesn't make a difference. If it's not essential, then then you need to consider whether it has a disproportionate impact upon some minority group. If it does, then you got a problem. Selection is an important part of any human resource process. In fact, selection is what gets human resources names up in lights in many instances. So we're going to obviously spend a good little bit of time talking about selection as we talk about EEO and human resources. The selection process, anytime there's a process to draw these distinctions between people, we call that a test, selection test. Interviews can be tests, panel interviews can be tests. Any of these processes are tests, and they must meet the Griggs v. Duke job relatedness requirement. Griggs v. Duke turns upon a concept known as disparate impact. What disparate impact means, or disparate impact means, is that there is that the test, the selection process, has an impact upon some minority group or some suspect category, meaning a category that we've protected, that you can't make a distinction based upon. It has an impact upon some group protected against distinctions being made on based on something they're born with. Therefore, a policy can have a disparate impact upon women, gender, sex. A policy can have a disparate impact upon men. A policy can have a disparate impact upon African Americans or upon Latinos. A policy can have a disparate impact upon people over the age of 40. A policy can have a disparate impact upon people of a different religion. Meaning, what that means is that when I look at the pool of people, these people who are in this group are represented in smaller percentages than they are in the general labor force, i.e., African Americans make 20% of the North Carolina labor force. They only make 5% of your pool here. African Americans are 18% of the people qualified for these positions. They have because they have the education. African Americans only are 2% of your pool of those who are going to be interviewed. And therefore the question then becomes, what is the selection process that is causing African Americans not to make it through? African Americans were 50% of those who applied. They were 10% of those who made it to the next round. Is this test? This test, therefore, has a disparate impact upon African Americans or upon some recognized group, a protected category. Now, merely because it has a disparate impact doesn't mean it's discriminatory. A disparate impact, however, raises the red flag that it may be discriminatory. And if you can put disparate impact with the lack of job relatedness, then you've got Griggs v. Duke, then you have a unlawful practice. If you don't have disparate impact and don't have job relatedness, if either one of those is missing, then the practice can probably go on. It's probably lawful. The other side is not disparate impact, where the percentages show that minorities are being excluded, but disparate treatment, which means I'm not looking at a group of minorities or a group of protected class, a group in a protected class, but I'm looking at one individual, and I'm trying to say that that individual or that group of individuals is being treated differently. Failure to hire me, I can say you did it because I am black, and therefore because I'm a male, and therefore I then can say that is disparate treatment. When you compare my credentials with others' credentials, I should have made it into the pool. I didn't. Why didn't I make it into the pool? I was minority. I was black. My credentials were better than those other people. I am arguing that it is disparate treatment. Even though there may be other blacks in the pool, I can still argue disparate treatment because I may be able to argue because you didn't want any older blacks. You didn't want any blacks over 40. All the blacks that made it into the pool were blacks under 40. And then you didn't want any over 40 because you thought you were going to have to pay me more money. Therefore, as a result, I'm arguing disparate treatment. You treated me differently. And that's what disparate treatment means. I treated someone differently out there. Not that disparate impact says that while you may not have intended to treat me differently, because of the way the policy is written or the test is administered, I am being treated differently. I am being excluded. I don't have to intend it. I'm just being able to show that I was indeed excluded, that I was discriminated against. The distinction was drawn, and minorities within my category were excluded, and that disproportionately in higher numbers than others. That's disparate impact. I'm not showing intent. I'm just showing that in fact we were excluded. We were not hired. An adverse decision was made, and that adverse decision that was made had impacted us in higher numbers, higher rates, higher percentages than other people, than other groups. Disparate treatment says I'm not looking at the statistics anymore. I'm not dueling statisticians at this point. I'm saying you treated me differently as an individual, and that differently is based upon an impermissible reason. Okay, so it's not only was I treated differently, but I was treated differently because of an impermissible reason. If you didn't hire me, and because I was black, then I was treated differently, and it was for an impermissible reason. But if you didn't hire me because I wasn't qualified, then I was treated differently, but it was not for an impermissible reason. Out there. Now, you can also treat someone differently, but have them in your organization. It is not unusual to find what I call the black unit, where you walk in and the leader of the organization of that unit is black, and everybody in that unit is black, or everyone in that unit is minority, or everyone in that unit is a female, and you just don't have any diversity in that unit, and that can be disparate treatment. I was assigned to this area because of my gender, or because of my race, or because of my ethnicity, and that can be disparate treatment for a number of reasons, because you may not have the kinds of opportunities in that unit as you have in the other units. In the selection process, there is an instance in which you have what we can term legalized discrimination. And that is in the instance of bona fide occupational qualification. A bona fide occupational qualification is an instance in which you make a distinction based upon an impermissible reason, but you're able to say that reason is essential to accomplishing the job. That reason is one of the KSAOs. Therefore, I'm able to say I drew a distinction based upon the person's gender, but gender was an O in the KSAOs. It was a required meant of the job. You cannot perform the job successfully unless you have the O, and that O just happens to be gender or ethnicity or race or age 40 or under age 40, something of that nature. And so basically a BFAQ allows you to discriminate based upon an impermissible reason because it's saying one of the essential requirements of the job, to do the job, one of the KSAOs is that reason, is that impermissible reason. Let me give you two examples. The washroom attendant that hands you the towel in a high-class restaurant, who is sitting there when people come in, use the restroom, hands you the towel, hands you your lotion, sort of makes you feel comfortable. That washroom attendant is going to be a male in a male washroom, is going to be a female in a female washroom. Why? Because one of the essentials of the job is you need to be a male, because the right to privacy sort of trumps this discrimination thing. The example I often give in class, you're at Good Samaritan Missionary Baptist Church. I'm now trying to hire a pastor and a rabbi who is Jewish applies for the job. I'm not going to hire them. And why didn't I hire them? Because you're Jewish. Because one of the KSAOs of our job, that certainly probably needs to be announced when you do it, is you have to be a Baptist. You have to be a Baptist. You have to be a Christian first and a Baptist next. Because even in that distinction, I could say I'm not even going to hire a Methodist minister, because the O in ours is Baptist. On the other hand, there have been instances that the EEO had in which a nonprofit said, well, we deal with prisoners' reentry. And some prisoners in California and other places have had a very, very difficult time with race, particularly in prison. And what we want to do is assign black counselors, black mentors to black prisoners, Latino mentors to Latino prisoners, white mentors to white prisoners, because that they work better that way. And the compromise is we'll ask them, do you have a preference? And if you have a preference, if a black prisoner says, I want a black mentor, then that's what we'll assign. But if a black prisoner says, I'd like a white mentor, that's what we're going to assign based upon race. And if a black mentor says, I don't care, then you can assign any black prisoner says, I don't care, then you can assign anyone. Basically, the EEOC looked at that and considered it and said, no, we don't let employment decisions are not made based upon customer preference. Customer preference. I mean, if you think about it, back in the 60s and 70s, there'd be a lot of restaurants that would not have had black waiters because customers would have preferred having a white person wait on their table. In fact, if you go to many restaurants now, you will find black busboys and white waiters, wait staff. I'm not sure that there's not some discrimination going on, but in fact, the EEO says we don't allow the assignment of people based upon ethnicity, because a customer has a preference. That is not lawful under the law. That is so BFOQ is sort of a get out of discrimination free. If you can justify the BFOQ, then you can, and it's a lawful BFOQ, then you can justify an act which would otherwise be discrimination. In terms of attracting and retaining employees, one of the key ways of doing that is compensation. And in the compensation area, discrimination is still, unfortunately, a constant battle. White women earn 78 cents for every dollar earned by white males. Black women earn, or African American women earn 67 cents for every dollar earned by white males, and Latino women earn 56 cents for every dollar earned by a white male. Thus, in terms of attracting um, HR systems designed to attract and retain employees, compensation is, again, a constant battle in terms of gender and in terms of race to ensure that it is equitable and ethical and ensure that it is in compliance with the civil rights statutes. This, in the compensation area, disparate impact comes into play. Disparate impact generally comes into play when you're talking about examining a policy, trying to see, does this policy have a different impact, a greater impact on a suspect category, race, gender, and national origin, religion, than it does others in another category. In the compensation area, disparate impact can occur when you have a seniority system and when you are basically salaries are based upon historic salaries. Historic salaries still can carry the vestiges of discrimination, and as a result of that, you're just building a salary based upon a salary. And so if the initial salary was based upon an impermissible reason when it was set, all other decisions which are percentages of that are also based upon impermissible reasons. The example I often give is in the physical ed department, where the males, a much more macho world, where males were coaches of teams. Then, as the Title IX came in and women became coaches also, sometimes if you did not take a total assessment of the compensation, the male salaries sort of stayed where they were. The women's salaries came up some, but the male salaries were built on years and years of, of coaching and teaching. And those salaries, the gap never was caught up. And unless you made a conscious effort to catch that gap up, the discrimination is still there based upon the historic decisions that were made. And therefore, while no one now is making a decision that is treating the women differently, because your policy is to build salaries based upon percentages, those percentages are based upon and the underlying salary is based upon a discriminatory decision, then you're just multiplying based upon discrimination. That creates problems. The other situation that can occur in the compensation area is disparate treatment. That is, just treating people differently because they are women, or because they are black, or because of some ethnicity or national origin. That can come into play, particularly because in many instances, people who have been excluded from the place of employment, they've not been executives, they've not been in this company, sometimes are very poor negotiators. And as a result of being poor negotiators, their salaries may be different from others. The problem is you're not going to be able to win that argument. If in fact there's a $15,000 difference between one member of your staff and another member of your staff, and they do essentially the same job, and you argue that, well, this person negotiated better than the other, it's your job to create the equity within the organization, and therefore you cannot then say, well, they were a bad negotiator, because now they're suing you saying you didn't. I'm being discriminated against. You made that decision, and essentially you did make the decision about what you were going to offer and ultimately pay, based upon an impermissible reason. So that would be viewed as desperate treatment. So even though employers sometimes think, well, my job is to get the best worker for the lowest price, that's not truly the case. You're supposed to get the best worker for a price within your budgetary constraints, but you also have to make sure that it is that equity is meted out in making that decision. Sometimes people always use the argument that the market dictates that the newer employee gets paid more money because I need to bring them in. Well, that argument never worked. I've had to litigate that case. It never works, because the same market that required you to pay $15,000 more than your average salary to bring this person in from somewhere else, that same market requires you to pay $15,000 more to keep someone from leaving and going somewhere else. So what it takes to attract, also it takes to retain. And therefore, that argument does not carry sway with courts. I would, and in hearing that argument, and you need to be armed with knowledge of that, because you're going to want to make that argument as a manager, and you're going to want to argue against that argument as an employee. That argument generally does not win the day when confronted with a judge and a jury. I've also even heard people make the argument in terms of desperate treatment that I treated this person differently because they were the main breadwinner in the family. That argument absolutely does not win the day. In fact, that argument is virtually on its face discriminatory, particularly if it is in a gender-based discrimination, a woman versus a man. That is almost, you might as well admit to discriminating. In fact, you have admitted to discriminating when you make that argument. It just will not pass the laugh test in front of a court. We will go over the various civil rights statutes, employment civil rights statutes, later on in this discussion, but I think I need to say here that when you're talking about pay, the Equal Pay Act and Title VII are there designed to protect against gender discrimination, and the equal pay is specifically designed against gender discrimination in terms of compensation. The other thing that I think you need to also be aware of is a recent development, the Lilly Ledbetter Act. The Lilly Ledbetter Act was passed, one of the first acts signed by President Barack Obama. It was introduced while under George Bush, and George Bush indicated that he would veto it. And because we had a Republican-led Congress, they pretty much demagogued it by saying it's just an act which will help lawyers make more money. Now, obviously, I have a little bias since I'm a lawyer and I practice civil rights law, so you got to read a little of this with some level of bias. But what the Lilly Ledbetter Act essentially does is, what Lilly Ledbetter had been is she had been in the private sector. In the private sector, your salary is not public record. In fact, in the private sector, your salary is private, and in fact, you can be fired for disclosing what your salary is. And so, when Lilly Ledbetter was working, she never knew what her other colleagues were making because that was private. They could not discuss it. It was not a matter for public consumption. Lilly suspected that she was being paid less than other people supervising as she was, but she had no knowledge of that. Well, upon retirement, she then discovered in fact, she was making significantly less than her male counterparts. And so she filed a lawsuit. What basically happened was the Supreme Court said, well, Miss Ledbetter, yeah, you may have a claim, but the Title VII and the other acts have a 180-day statute of limitations, which means you can go back and sue for any wages that you would have earned within 180 days of your last check. That's 6 months of your last check. You can file for wages, back wages to that tune. Well, she had retired. This meant that she was not really going to get any wages. And what the Lilly Ledbetter Act came in and corrected that and basically said, okay, if you're in an instance in which wages are not known, then we're going to go and say you're going to be able to file within 180 days of the time that you knew or should have known what the wages were. And in that particular instance, she preserves her rights to go back and file the lawsuit because she just found out, and therefore now she can go back for the statutory period of time that protected her, and that was one of the first acts. I think you may find Lilly Ledbetter the case and the testimony on your website, and I believe it may have even been assigned to you. Retention is a goal of the human resource system, and under the retention goal of the human resource system, you have subsystems dealing with promotion, reward, recognition, and compensation. Like the selection with regards to promotion, all promotional tests, all promotional requirements must be job related. You still have Griggs v. Duke that is applicable even in the promotion selection area. One of the things that occurs often in promotion and in reward and recognition that gives people problems in both the public sector, private, and nonprofit is rater bias. Rater bias comes into effect because people see the world through their own filters, through the filters of their life. It is, while you think everyone sees the world the same way you do, recognize that I perceive the world through and interpret it through my life experiences. And therefore, sometimes there can be, and because there are thin lines between positive and negative perceptions, rater bias becomes very important. There's a thin line between arrogant and confident. And so people will sometimes call someone arrogant they don't like. I've never been called arrogant by anyone who liked me. Generally speaking, there's a thin line between arrogant and confident. I tell a story I often tell is when I was doing discrimination cases, I had a county commissioner call me arrogant, and I remember telling him, saying to him, well, sir, why do you call me arrogant? He says, because you keep telling us what you're going to do, and we don't particularly like it. You're arrogant about it. And I then say, well, sir, you're mad at me because I tell you what I'm going to do, and I do it. And it happens, and we win. And now you're mad. I'm not arrogant. I may be egotistical, but I'm not arrogant. There is a difference. Arrogant is someone who says he can do something and can't do it. You're mad at me because I say I can do it and do it. Well, which reinforced his thought that I was arrogant, but he didn't like me, and I was going to give him plenty of reason not to. But there's a thin line between a person who's perceived to be arrogant and a person who's perceived to be confident. I was probably adequately being egotistical and arrogant in that particular instance. But even if I had tried to walk that line and stay on the confident side, he wasn't going to like me. And because the rater bias is the same way in the employment situation, it is sometimes human resources must be very careful to go back and look at the ratings of supervisors based upon race and gender and ethnicity to see if rater bias is permeating the organization, whether there is any statistical data which would show that one group or another, one suspect category or another, is disproportionately impacted by the promotional system or reward system or compensation system. Because those are instances in which you have a disparate impact. And those are instances in which you then will have some discrimination if you have disparate impact, and particularly if you're not able to show that your system is essential for the evaluation and operation of your organization. The other kind of rater bias occurs with what we call the halo effect. And this can be unlawful, but not always. For example, you have people who I just like them, and therefore everything they do is going to be seen in a quite different way. When others will say they're dictatorial, I'm going to say they're decisive. Because I see them in a different, I perceive them through the lens of my life's experiences, and they have a halo effect, and it operates to their advantage. That can be lawful as long as my halo effect applies across the board to people of various genders, races, and ethnicities. If I tend to have the halo effect for people in certain categories, then okay, that's going to be a problem. That may be a problem because that halo effect may also be discrimination and could be not only disparate impact, if it's broad enough in its practice, but it certainly could be disparate treatment. You can also have disparate treatment in other ways. Many times we don't look at it this way, but the assignment of jobs and responsibilities can create disparate treatment. For example, if I assign certain people more challenging work, broader experiences, give them better opportunity to network, then it means that at promotion time, they're going to have built a better portfolio. When they get ready to go out and seek jobs, they're going to have built a better portfolio, and therefore I would have treated them in a disparate way. And it looks as though, someone else got out of doing that job, but at this point I have treated them in such a way as to position them for the next level, and treated the other person in such a way as to position them to stay where they are. You can also have disparate treatment in reviews with regards to promotions and bonuses. Obviously, the halo effect again, and you've got to make sure and periodically review all your policies and practices to make sure that disparate treatment is not occurring. Most of this slide we've already gone over. We've talked about Equal Pay Act, which deals with gender-based discrimination and with regards to pay only, and Title VII, which deals with a broader discrimination, gender as well as race, color, creed, national origin, and in almost every aspect of employment it does, but it does include gender-based discrimination. We've had some discussion about that, and we'll discuss both of those later. I will, however, mention BFOQs again, because BFOQs, while they are very legitimate when you're, or can be very legitimate when you're talking about selection, they generally are not valid excuses, a valid justification with regards to pay and promotion. Um, Unless a person is, regard to pay, I can think of no instances in which BFOQ is a valid a valid defense to discrimination. It's similar to there are not many instances, and I cannot think of any in which ethnicity or race is a valid BFOQ. Um, there may be one in a million, but it would be extremely rare, equivalent to seeing a pink horse. The BFOQs will not. They're, it's equivalent to seeing a unicorn riding a pink horse to find a BFOQ with regards to compensation. Now, rarely, but possible, you could find a BFOQ with regards to promotion. But generally speaking, if a person is being promoted to a similar job in the line, if the BFOQ didn't knock them out from the initial position, it's not going to knock them out from the second level position. But certainly, I could see maybe an instance where religion would allow you to take a certain level job that doesn't make church policy, but that the next level up makes church policy, and therefore you would not make, and therefore you have to be a believer in the church doctrine, and therefore you can show a valid BFOQ for promotion. But again, those are going to be very rare instances in which a BFOQ is going to impact promotion, and virtually no instance where it will impact compensation and raises. Another goal of the human resource system is to develop a competent and productive workforce, and they do that in systems designed to train, to discipline, dismissal, and in their performance management system. Let's talk about how discrimination rears its head in those systems. In training, you can sometimes find discrimination in the way people are selected to go to training. And that is, you can basically select people for training based upon one of those impermissible reasons, disparate treatment. And that does occur. You sometimes have to do an evaluation to see who's going to training, what training they're going to, the value of that training. And what training they go to is important, because all training, we know, is not equal. If I'm sending you training to get you some certification, make you more valuable, then that kind of training will give you some new skills. Then that kind of training is certainly more sought after. And you want to see, is there some trend in who goes to various training? And is that trend along a racial, gender, ethnic, impermissible reason? BFOQs generally will not come into play. I can't think of any instance in which a BFOQ is going to be a valid reason for denying a person training in a job that they are currently in. It theoretically could be a valid excuse for training in a job that they are moving to, but it's going to be rare. It's a pink horse with a unicorn on top. Performance management. You managers all come to this world with some, or come to their management positions with some form of bias. because we perceive the world through through the filter of our life. And so sometimes language, dress, other things cause me to perceive people differently because of the way I was raised, and that rater bias, sometimes good rater bias, like the halo effect, sometimes bad rater bias, will kick in. The question is that rater bias also coincidental or simultaneously occurring with bias based upon an impermissible reason, race, gender, ethnicity? Remember, I can rate you lowly because I just don't like you. I can rate you lowly because I don't like short people. I can rate you lowly for any reason other than the impermissible reasons. Therefore, in North Carolina, though not fair, I can rate you lowly because I think you are you're gay or lesbian or bisexual. I can rate you lowly based upon that because there's no protection for that outside the university. Inside the university, there is protection, but outside the university, there's no protection for that in state government. No protection for that in nonprofits. No protection for that in the private sector. And as a result of that lack of protection, I could rate you lowly, and you're not violating any of the EEO provisions of the law because there's no legal protection there. Maybe unethical, but not illegal. Also, the discipline dismissal system is clearly one that can have discrimination built into it. Remember, managers have great discretion. And as a result of that great discretion, and a result of the natural filters in which they perceive the world, managers will sometimes have perceive insubordination or not following an order or something that along the disciplinary track in ways that are biased. Again, if these biases are not coincidental with the impermissible reasons, they're lawful to engage in. But if those biases, if you're more likely to perceive a African American as having said something that is insubordinate, if you're more likely to perceive an African American as late when they are 4 minutes late, and not the same way when someone else is 4 minutes late, then these biases then start coming in to create a discriminatory atmosphere and potentially a case of discrimination. So you can have disparate treatment because of the perception of a manager out there, and in their application of the discipline dismissal process in inequitable, unequal ways. Because he perceives African Americans as always being late, he is on African Americans who are late, riding their back, and more likely to write them up after too tardiness, and others who he thinks, well, they have a legitimate excuse for being late, does not write them up. That indeed can result in that's a desperate treatment that can result in bias in the application of the discipline dismissal policy. You can also have discipline dismissal policies which on their face cause desperate impact. Grooming discipline dismissal policies which tend to have a disproportionate impact upon minorities, and you're disciplining because they have failed to comply with it to the letter, then yes, that can also create disparate impact. in the government, not in nonprofit, not in the private sector, you can have discrimination based upon arbitrary and capricious. Therefore, I can discipline you without there being a rational basis for the discipline, without being able to justify the discipline. I did it because I wanted to do it, not because there was a strong, legitimate basis for doing it. In those particular instances, that is arbitrary and capricious, and you're protected against that. Now, I might add that same supervisor in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, who does it because they want to do it. They didn't do it because of some impermissible reason. They didn't do it because of your race, your gender. They did it because they wanted to do it and they just didn't like you. That's the reason why they did it. You are not protected there. So they could actually engage in the discipline dismissal process. On the same token here, if there's a faculty member that I just don't like, I can't make up something and discipline them because I just don't like them, because it would be arbitrary and capricious. That protection does not occur in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector. The previous slides we discussed the kinds of transactions that discrimination would occur in, and sort of put it in a transactional context. You can also have discrimination just in your environment. Remember, the purpose of a human resource system is to create an environment that treats people in an ethical and equitable manner. You can have an environment that does not do that, and in some instances, that environment will arise to to be so onerous that it is an actionable case of discrimination. In fact, that occurs when you're talking about harassment. And I use the term harassment, not sexual harassment, because harassment is unlawful if it is for any of the impermissible reasons. If I am harassing you because of your gender, I'm harassing you because of your race, your color, your ethnicity, your national origin, any of those reasons that you see on the right side of the slide, then that is harassment, and that harassment, that is unlawful harassment, and that harassment can, under most statutes, result in actionable discrimination. Now, harassment is not just I'm put you in a situation that you're uncomfortable one time. Harassment is an environment that is sufficiently onerous, sufficiently burdensome, that it changes the terms of employment. The conduct must be unwelcomed by the victim, and the harassing, it must be considered harassing by reasonable people. Now, all of that makes a difference. All these are elements to an harassment claim. It says it has to be sufficiently onerous or burdensome, meaning, generally speaking, one incident is not going to be sufficient. Now, there are some cases that one incident is enough, particularly if there's a touching with the harassment, or if there is, or if the harassment is so outrageous that reasonable people would say this changes the terms of your employment. Meaning, it's so outrageous. There's a physical touching which causes the person to no longer want to be able to go in their supervisor's office, to no longer want to be able to walk by the supervisor. There's such, the harassment is so burdensome that it causes the person to change their normal course of operation, change the terms of their employment, or change the normal course, the normal way they do things. So you would normally walk to the water cooler one way and now you are walking in another way. That generally doesn't happen in one incident, but it can if it is so outrageous that a reasonable person would change their course of operations or normal course of operations. That typically occurs in a touching. It can also occur in a quid pro quo, which we'll talk about later. The conduct also must be unwelcomed. All right? So if you have two consenting adults engaged in a conversation that is would otherwise be sexual harassment, but these are people who are consenting, it is not sexual harassment at that point. It becomes sexual harassment. The problem is most companies also have policies which just tend to frown upon supervisors and or people who have a supervisory or colleagues even dating each other. And the reason for that is it becomes difficult sometimes to tell when something is welcomed and when something is unwelcomed. The typical case is when people have been dating and then later on the relationship sours, then things that would have otherwise been welcomed during the dating period are no longer welcomed, and therefore it turns into sexual harassment. And so companies just sort of have a no tolerance policy, and the best way is just don't date anybody in your workplace. Certainly, a supervisor doesn't date anyone in their workplace. And the reason for that is if you're a supervisor, it is difficult, very, very difficult to determine whether it is welcomed or unwelcomed. Anytime you have a supervisory relationship with a person that you have a personal relationship with, it can be argued that that relationship wasn't built upon mutual affection for each other, but was built upon the supervisor subordinate relationship, and the only reason they succumbed to the advances was because of the power in the position. And it's just difficult for employers to be able to prove that it was welcomed at that point. And so they just basically discourage all supervisory employee subordinate relationships, which is a very wise thing to do. It also must be harassment that a person in a similar situation would deem harassing, and that's a reasonably reasonable person, an objective person out there. And so all these elements must be there. Harassment can take various forms. You've got the harassing environment, which I've sort of described already, the environment which causes a person to be so onerous, so burdensome that you're changing the way you normally would do things. It's certainly unwelcomed. That can be just pictures hanging on a wall. You're not comfortable with those pictures. A picture of a black man lynched, a picture of a scantily clad woman or a scantily clad man, a poster that has words that are sexually suggestive, or words that have a negative connotation to someone of certain ethnic groups or national origin. Any of those posters can create kinds of problems. There's also the a concept in the law called quid pro quo, and it's Latin and it actually means something in exchange for something else. And quid pro quo is always harassing. The first time, basically what you're saying is, and it generally happens in the sexual context. I've not seen it happen in other contexts because generally you can't ask a person to make you black if I give you a promotion. But you can ask a person for some kind of sexual favors in exchange for a promotion out there. And so you can have quid pro quo. You can also have sort of a quid pro quo where a person has given sexual favors, gets the promotion, and you're saying, I didn't get the promotion because I didn't give sexual favors, of course, and therefore I'm the benefit of not, the person benefited from their quid pro quo, and I am discriminated against. So quid pro quo can sort of take two forms, but in all instances, quid pro quo is unlawful. And it is, and you do have supervisors still occurring where that is just occurring and is dumb. The one of the a very common kind of harassment is racial harassment, and it is becoming more and more common to have nooses found in workplaces. This is both private sector and public sector. And there have been a number of cases in which nooses, I mean, we had one in our DOT. There's, in fact, a website which is maintained that talks about all these noose incidents. There was, in fact, a case in Louisiana where there was a noose in a transportation unit, and in fact, there was they would litigate it in the court. Well, the administrative law judge in Louisiana basically said, well, these people were joking, and therefore it was not. He did not feel that a reasonable person in similar circumstances would have viewed this seriously and seen it as harassing. It is kind of difficult for me to see how a noose, in the context that this one was, because there were some other racially inflammatory things around, how that in that context, noose was going to be anything other than racial harassment. It may not have constituted harassment in the actionable legal sense, but it was harassment and getting there. I think that case, if appealed, may find itself overturned once it gets into the light of a real court, not an administrative court. Comments about age, quite common. I remember having a case, it was a private sector case, where a person walked in and the people said that their supervisor basically said this clothing store needed to have a younger image. And they actually proceeded to fire these older employees who had the best selling record of anyone, a more youthful image, and other age comments were made that can constitute sexual harassment. I mean, age harassment, and certainly, typically, what happens is these comments are made, then other bad things occur, and then they bring out. It causes people to bring out to start their action. Now, let me stop here and just remind everyone, because these are EEO claims, there is generally a 180-day statute of limitations, 6 months. So if someone calls you a racially defamatory name, you can't wait 9 months later and do it when they now want to furlough you. No, you have to cause that action. That action needs to be done within 180 days of the incident. Now, all harassment is not unlawful. The only harassment that is unlawful is harassment that is because you're in one of those suspect categories, one of those categories listed on the side of this slide. Please also note that the categories on the side of the slide may not include, in some states, sexual orientation, because that's not a federal category, that's a state category or a local category. And so it may not include that. So in some states, sexual orientation, harassment, though not ethical, not proper, is not unlawful. It's not unlawful. However, let me then stop and say, harassment of a sexual nature is unlawful. I'll give you the case of On Call. On Call was a case in which the employee was on an oil derrick, and in that oil derrick there were nothing but men, and the men got engaged in horseplay. On Call was engaged in horseplay, and they did just horrendous things. Threatened to sodomize him. They woke him up in the middle of the night and stripped him and beat him with towels and did a number of things that were sexual in their connotation, touching this. But the evidence was that none of these men On Call, nor any of the men messing with him, were homosexual. So the argument from the court, the company was, well, this is not sexual harassment because none of these men were sexually attracted. They never actually engaged in any sexual acts. They weren't asking him out. They weren't sexually attracted, and he was heterosexual himself. This wasn't sexual harassment because there was no real amorous desires on anyone's part. And the Supreme Court basically said, no, you don't have to have amorous desires. All sexual harassment is harassment of a sexual nature. This harassment clearly was egregious, clearly was of a sexual nature. A reasonable person would say that this was harassment. It was onerous. It was the definition of onerous. I can guarantee you, if you read the case, it is so repulsive that you can almost smell it from the pages. And it was certainly unwelcomed. He complained to supervisors. He wrote letters to his bosses off the oil derrick at the company, and they did absolutely nothing. So this was a classic case, and the court rightfully found that was sexual harassment, even though there was no amorous feelings, no desires on the part of any of the people to have sex with anybody involved in the case. Now, however, let me go back and say harassment is not all unlawful. So, for example, if a person is harassing another person because they just don't like them, personal animus, then that harassment in the private sector is not unlawful. Now, in non-profit sector, not unlawful. But in government, if that harassment results in something that is arbitrary and capricious, if in fact you're treating the person in an arbitrary and capricious manner as a result of it, then that harassment may give rise to a Fourth Amendment and what we call a 1983 Fourth Amendment claim, or 1983 14th Amendment claim is the correct version. But those are certainly unusual kinds of cases. Personal animus occurs all the time, and that person, as long as I just sort of don't like you, it doesn't happen. I remember a case of DOT where they sent a man down. His boss didn't like him. He was always complaining, always citing things that they did not do right. He may have been right in what he did, but they didn't like him, and they moved his office from one floor to the basement floor, where there was absolutely no one else in the basement except one other person. The basement had no windows. The basement was just a kind of bad place to be located, and they intended it to be harassing, but it had nothing to do with his race, his gender. It had all to do with the fact that they just didn't like him. So if it's because of race, if it's because of race or gender, yeah, that harassment's unlawful. But if it's because of personal animus or professional rivalries or professional dislikes, that's not going to constitute harassment. We have pretty much talked about most of the context in which discrimination in its many forms can occur. But so I don't need to talk about discipline dismissal. We've discussed that in a previous slide. But I do need to talk about it in terms of policy drafting. In terms of policy drafting, you always have to be careful because policies can impact different groups differently. And this is where policy for selecting, policy for retention, policy for vacation, all can have a disparate impact upon certain groups. And if they have disparate impacts on any of the suspect categories, and they aren't considered reasonably necessary, then you may find yourself in a lawsuit, particularly when it comes to selection policies, which would require a person to do certain things that aren't job related, can result in disparate impact, and therefore can result in litigation, loss of litigation, liability. But even beyond the selection, policies with regards to leave can sometimes favor men over women, who may be more often the caretaker of children or elderly parents. Policies with regards to grooming can sometimes impact certain ethnic minorities versus other minorities. Policies with regards to holidays can impact certain religions more than other religions. Policies with regards to health and safety can impact people in certain religions more than other religions. So you must always look, and it is very important to have a diverse group of people looking over your policies and analyzing, because you do need to consider the impact it potentially can have on the diversity of your workforce. Sometimes the people who are impacted by it will not complain, but it will just start discouraging people who are similarly who are in a similar group from applying for your positions. The discrimination also can occur in the facilities, and this is true both, again, in the public sector and the private sector. There are facilities, if not built properly, can in fact be discriminatory and violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you always have to be careful and mindful of that. Discrimination also occurs or can occur in addressing the HR goal of operating within your budgetary constraints. And when you're dealing with budgets, you can have discriminatory actions or discriminatory policies. Let's talk a little bit about that. Typically one of the subsystems that addresses budgetary constraints is systems to deal with rifts and reorganizations. Reductions in force, that's what we sometimes call a RIF, can in many instances and historically have had brought up issues of age discrimination. Meaning, if I'm going to lay somebody off, lay off the people who have 30 or more years of service who can retire. Therefore, by laying them off, it means that the young people who cannot retire, who would be out of a job, and can then stay on. That sounds perfectly reasonable, but it's a violation of the law. The law basically says you cannot target people because they have 30 years of service. Because if you target them because they have 30 years of service, it means that they, by definition, since they could not have started working when they were 10, are over the age of 40. And therefore, you, by definition, targeted people over the age of 40, and therefore you've engaged in age discrimination. There are ways of actually doing that, but the retirement has to be voluntary. There has to be a special waiver. There are a number of days that have to have transpired between the time of the waiver and the time the waiver takes effect, and they have to have the right to be able to rescind it. And there are a number of other special provisions in the Age Discrimination Act that regulations that must be complied with in order for you to have a sort of policy or program that allows people of a certain age to retire early during these sort of budget reduction periods. One of the cases I dealt with as state personnel director was that exact case of an agency that did that, and we went around several times before they realized the serious error of their ways. Rifts and reorganizations can have their desperate impact upon age, but they also can have desperate impact upon other groups within the suspect categories. For example, if by changing or riffing or reorganizing, I'm outsourcing or sending away the lower paid employees, that may indeed mean I'm having a desperate impact upon minorities or upon people in certain people of certain ethnic groups or people in a different national origin. And as a result of that, you can end up finding yourself in court with regards to that. So you can have a desperate impact as a result of a reorganization plan or a RIF plan that doesn't take into effect that the groups that are most impacted may be populated by groups within your suspect categories or protected categories. So if I'm going to RIF all of my chairs at the university, then by definition, to be a chair, you have to be tenured. By definition, to be tenured, you have to have your terminal degree. You have to have a certain number of years of experience, at least probably eight years of experience in most instances. And so by the time you get a terminal degree and 8 years of experience, you are very close to 40 years old, and it doesn't take much. Then at that point, you still have to have some other experiences. And so I know of very few chairs under the age of 40. And therefore, anytime you start having a policy, a reorganization policy, or a budget policy that reduces the salary or reduces in some way impacts chairs at a university, then you are disproportionately impacting people age 40 and above. And so you may have yourself a problem. Budgetary constraints. One of the defenses for ADA is that in order to accommodate, if a person, for example, is found to be disabled, but that with reasonable accommodations, this person could do the job, then the ADA requires that the employer engage in the reasonable accommodations. To give you an example, I had a young man who, because of cerebral palsy, could not use his his right hand. Well, when everyone went to typing their own first drafts and other things, as an analyst, he was disadvantaged because he could not type and could not, in essence, do his job because he needed to type policy and type analysis of policy and analysis of practices, and he couldn't do that at that point. We didn't have secretaries anymore. We had done away with those secretaries to go enlarge the large clerical staff because everyone was typing their own first drafts. At that point, we had, the law requires that, the ADA requires that we have to accommodate, that we have to engage in reasonable accommodations. If a person with reasonable accommodations is able to perform the job, has the KSAOs necessary to perform the job, meaning if I can give accommodation and the person will have the KSAOs necessary to do the job, then I have to reasonably accommodate. The term reasonable accommodation depends upon budget. And therefore, in some instances, I can accommodate, but if the accommodation means I have to buy a plane and send this person on a plane every day, then that's not reasonable accommodations. But if the accommodation was that I was going to spend $2,000 extra and buy a computer that was voice activated, then I was not going to be able to use the $2,000 as my excuse. That was reasonable accommodation. In most instances with government, reasonable budget is not going to keep you from accommodating. The example I gave about the plane, budget's going to keep you from accommodating. The example I gave about the $2,000 extra on his computer, that's not going to keep you from accommodating. So if I'm paying $3,000 for everybody's computer, but I pay $5,000 for his, that is reasonable accommodation. And I have to engage in that a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disability Act. That changes a little when you're talking about nonprofits, because in a nonprofit, it may be possible that that the additional money is such a percentage of their budget that it is not considered reasonable accommodation. So a nonprofit that has roughly a $10,000 budget and 3 employees, part-time employees, and 95% of the budget goes for paying those part-time employees, and now you need to spend $2,000 extra to buy a computer for someone. That may not be a reasonable accommodation when that now probably takes up 2/3 of your operating budget. That may not be reasonable accommodation in that particular instance. For businesses, you can make some of the same arguments. It again is less likely to carry the day in a major business because they will have the same problems that that government has. They have the budget. They just have to allocate it and use that as a priority item. The next podcast will be, we'll go over the various anti-discrimination statutes, talk about compliance and a number of other things. We'll go over them. I would suggest that you, the PowerPoint that is already on Blackboard has both sections of this podcast in it. It has both the section that I've just gone over and the new section that you will find in the second podcast, part 2 of the podcast. So you only need one to print down the PowerPoint one time, but you will need to listen to 2 podcasts. Thank you for your patience. See you with the next podcast.